The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Everyone, I'm Gordon Lam, President of the Lam Si Ho Tong Society. I'll be your moderator tonight, and I'm honored to welcome you to this special Asian Heritage Month talk, Once Upon a Time in Chinatown, the Evolution of Chinese Desserts. So first and foremost, tonight we are going to talk about desserts, right? But we are not going to hand out any food. We can give out some recipes, and we can also recommend some cooking books. So that's what we are going to do. Food is one of the most beautiful ways that culture speaks. Chinese desserts have evolved in many fascinating ways, shaped by waves of immigration and influenced by the multicultural richness of Toronto. Tonight, we will explore that story through 5 iconic Chinese desserts that have made their marks here in Toronto. Some came from the distant villages in the Guangdong province. Others arrived with the waves of Hong Kong and Macau immigrants. And still, others reflect the creativity of a new generation raised in this multicultural city of Toronto. You'll hear from 2 passionate speakers, Chiyi Tam and Koby Song-Nichols, who will take us on a journey through 5 remarkable desserts. We hope tonight's talk will awaken not just your appetite, but also your curiosity, and perhaps a touch of the nostalgia. So regarding Q&A, I'd like to let everyone know that we'll be having the Q&A section at the end of the talk. If you have any questions during the presentation, you may raise your hand, and one of our volunteers would pass a slip of the Q&A paper. And then at the end, by the end of the talk, one of our volunteers will be walking around to collect them just before the Q&A begins. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as time allows, and we really welcome your thoughts and dessert-related memories. Let's begin with the dessert that not quite from China, but very much part of the Chinese dining experience in North America. Do you know what this person's eating? Give it a try.
Someone said it.
Oh, really? Oh, okay, wow, bingo. So you're right, that's fortune cookies. So when many Canadians think of Chinese dessert, right, one image often comes to mind, a crispy golden cookie with a mysterious message inside. Fortune cookies are not traditionally Chinese, but they became a lasting symbol of Chinese restaurant culture in the West. To share more about their curious origins and cultural impacts, I'd like to invite Koby.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Gordon, for kind of coordinating us and with this. So I have the honor of talking about fortune cookies and starting us off on our little tasting menu of Chinese desserts. And since I'm a historian, I like to start from the very beginning. And so I'm going to share some origin stories for fortune cookies. And I want you to pay attention. Gordon hinted at it, but see if you notice anything in these stories. So our first one, we have a couple competing claims for fortune cookies. The first one brings us to Kyoto, Japan, where there is a shrine outside called Fushimi, Inari Shrine in Kyoto. And if you went to that shrine, you'd see a shop that sells cookies that look very similar to fortune cookies, except they'll be a little bit bigger, they won't be as sweet, and they'll taste a little bit like miso. And so the earliest record of these fortune cookies are in the late 1800s, and so this is actually a painting of someone making these fortune cookies. So that's the first time we start seeing a cookie that looks pretty much like in that iconic shape. Second one, we're gonna move to North America, to San Francisco, where a gentleman named Makoto Hajiwara in San Francisco started giving out fortune cookies at his Japanese tea shop. And he was actually a part of a group of Japanese Americans who convinced Chinese restaurateurs to start including fortune cookies in their restaurants, or starting handing them out. And the last one I was able to find is David Zheng, who is a Chinese American based in LA, who claims to have created the fortune cookie in 1918. So there's a lot of contention here around who made the fortune cookie, but you might notice none of these have anything to do with China. And so it's very difficult to find a fortune cookie in China, but we can see some deep roots here in North America. And so, yeah, that kind of begs the question about how did this cookie become synonymous with Chinese restaurants here on this continent? And part of the answer comes with restaurants like this one. So this is a chop suey restaurant that is in Toronto's old Chinatown. And so if you've gone to a couple of these Asian Heritage Month events, you know, so this time period, the early 1900s, was not the best of times for Asian Americans and Asian Canadians. It was marked by a lot of anti-Chinese racism, anti-Asian racism, kind of emblemized by the head tax of 1885 and then the Chinese Immigration Act of 1923. But kind of interestingly, at this time, Chinese restaurants were more popular than ever. This is where a lot of North Americans' love of Chinese food started. And part of that story is with the fortune cookie. So the fortune cookie is one of those dishes that convinced non-Chinese diners to come into Chinatown and have some fun and create those connections with those restaurateurs. And so I want to bring us to Toronto, keep us in Toronto with this very famous local restaurant, the Kwang Chow Tavern, that was run by Jean Lum and her husband Doyle. And you can see here, we have fortune cookies featured right at top in a selection of homemade pastries. The Kwang Chow, moving forward in time a bit, was opened in 1959. And I want to highlight here, so as a historian, I look at a lot of old Chinese menus, or I get to, and this is kind of common today, there's a lot of restaurants that don't have a dessert section at all. So Chinese cuisine isn't really known for for desserts, but the fortune cookie was one of those first responses we have to saying, we want a little sweet treat, here is a fortune cookie. And interestingly, fortune cookies have been pretty well researched, or interestingly researched, so we have some fun fortune cookie facts. The first one I was able to find is 96% of people who eat fortune cookies at Chinese restaurants open their fortunes and read them. I don't know what the 4% does. 67% read those fortunes out loud. So if I'm good at math, 33% keep them to themselves. And then in a study of 595 fortunes, researchers Jin Ying and Yoshitaka Miike found that there are 4 categories of fortune cookie fortunes. The first one is prophecy, so they'll tell you what happens in the future. Second one's compliment, let's say something nice about you. Advice, and then wisdom. And these fun facts kind of show the important part of fortune cookies, which is that it's a communal experience. It's about getting diners to talk with one another and with the restaurateurs. And so I wanted to share a fortune that a dear friend shared with me. I'll read it out loud. The secret of staying young is to live honestly, eat slowly, and lie about your age. And so I position this as like wisdom, advice, so we get a little bit two for one here. And this is actually a Lucille Ball quote, so that opens a can of worms about plagiarism. And so I'll bring us back to Toronto here at the end, and Toronto has a very important history of producing fortune cookies here in Canada. I'll highlight 2 companies. So we have the Far East Food Products, which was founded in 1966. If you go on Huron Street, you can still see the sign of their fortune cookie factory. And then we also have Wings Fortune Cookie, which is kind of the more very popular fortune cookie brand here. And I want to highlight the innovation of Canadian fortune cookies is that now we can have French and English fortune, so good advice in French and English. But yeah, so
The only bilingual ones in the world.
there we go. Unless you can't learn from Chinese. Learn some Chinese. Yes. So yeah, so fortune cookies from the very beginning play that important role of creating those connections between Chinese restaurateurs and their diners, especially in times where it's not the pretty rough times. So yes.
So actually, we have
yes.
prepared some samples.
Yes.
Demo sample. So we make it a little bit bigger so everyone can see it clearer.
Yes.
So
They're not
it has,
plastic.
it has
Those
a
are
message
actually
inside.
handmade,
Homemade
edible, giant cookies.
Yeah. Small, medium, and large.
fortune. Right. Oh my gosh. Yes, I forgot to highlight.
Yeah, we could pass it around later after the talk. Yeah. All right. Next, let's turn to something simple but deeply rooted in tradition: fresh fruit platters. If you have ever attended a Chinese banquet, you likely ended the meal not with a cake or pie, but with beautifully arranged slices of oranges, watermelon, or dragon fruit. It may seem modest, but fruit has long been a dessert of choice in Chinese culture, symbolizing abundance and good health. Koby, could you share how this tradition has endured and what it means in today's multicultural Toronto?
Whoop, hello? Yes, I'd love to. So yeah, I'm covering kind of the two earlier desserts that we have. And so fruit is one of those, the earliest dessert you could ever get. So I like fruit as dessert because it's like the dessert of the people. For the longest time, the fruit desserts that we know, kind of the ones full of sugar and baked into a nice tart or something, are relatively new. It wasn't until the 1800s where refined sugar was a household item around the world. And so before that, you had to be an elite to have a fancy dessert or pastry. But so fruit served an important role of serving, like meeting people's sweet tooth for the longest time. And that doesn't mean that there wasn't care put into fruit. I want to highlight this beautiful fruit carving. And actually, it was in the Tang Dynasty where Chinese people started really carving fruits and seeing fruit as an opportunity to kind of exhibit care and artistry. And so I wanted to highlight some photos I took. So I recently got to go to China on a route searching trip. And here's some desserts, fruit as dessert I was able to find there. The first one, or the one on your left, is from a banquet I got to go to. And then the one on the right is a collection of fruit that my family from Guangzhou gave to me. And we're actually visiting a house that my great-grandfather built using his money that from the grocery stores he ran here. And so we have some mandarin oranges, some loquats, and bananas, and then we have dragon fruit, watermelon, and pineapple with a beautifully carved watermelon rind here. And I want to kind of point out just how much care goes into each of these. So the first one's procured and kind of welcoming me and my mom to China with a lot of care put through. And then the other one's very care through the artistry of the cutting of the fruit. Another dessert that we had, and was pretty common there, yes, those are cherry tomatoes. So we can finally settle the debate about whether tomatoes are fruits or vegetables. They are fruits and they are desserts, and these were really tasty. And it's kind of important to highlight the seasonality to fruit. So it's like, unlike a fortune cookie where you have a uniform dessert all year round, it's very consistent, fruit requires you to kind of respond to the seasons. And so you can choose the most ripe fruit for the moment, for the occasion. And going back to the Guangzhou menu, I just panned down the menu a little bit, and we actually see there's this menu special because there is a dessert section here. But if you notice, fortune cookies aren't included in the desserts, which is pretty interesting, and the rest of the desserts are all fruit. And so it's interesting for me to look at it as a historian because the restaurant was introducing diners in Toronto to fruits they may have never seen before. So I was a bit shocked to see kumquats, lychee, and my favorite, which is long an, there, which is called dragon eyes, served. And so we also see when restaurateurs are educating people about fortune cookies, they're also educating people about different fruits they may not have encountered before. Okay, so this one I want to play a little, or quiz you all about the symbolism of Chinese fruits. So I believe Gordon mentioned, fruit has a lot of symbolism in Chinese culture. And so I'm just going to ask you kind of telepathically, send me your answers, and then I'll do a Dora Explorer kind of like, you're right, halfway through. And so this one's first an apple. So think about it. Why do we put apples on altars for Chinese New Year? I'm seeing some nods. You seem familiar. That's right. So apple in Chinese is pingguo, and ping sounds like ping, which is peace. So it's to symbolize peace, and kind of you welcome that into your household. The next fruit I have is pomelo or pomelo. Think about it. Okay, I see some head shakes. Yeah. Yao. Yeah. Okay. Got a hint. If you speak Chinese, it's helpful. Also a pun. So this is in Mandarin, pomelo is youzi, and it sounds like yo, which is to have. So to have abundance, to have kind of a lot of things. You can pair it with other fruits, so you can have good fortune, you can have peace. And here's the last one. So we have some cut oranges. Got it. And yeah, that means that your mom loves you. So I'm highlighting this one because fruit is one of those amazing ways that Chinese Canadians show that they care for one another. There's this kind of sense in Chinese culture that we don't exhibit love through words, and we do it through action. And so getting a sliced fruit from your mom is a great way to do that. And so this was actually a fruit that was sliced up for me by my mom, and I wanted to highlight the antacid that's in the middle to make it look like a flower, because I kind of love that a lot. And so I also took this opportunity. So this is all happening, this introducing fruit, during this period of contemporary and then anti-Asian racism. And so in these talks, we talk about, there's a saying in Chinese, which is eating bitterness. And so we always talk about histories about eating bitterness. But I wanted to highlight that at the same time, Chinese people were eating sweetness and finding sweetness at the same time, finding new ways to take care of one another. And so that's fruit.
Great.
If I could have a penny for each time I've seen a bit of like millennial Asian American art or media that involved some joke about how you've never heard your mom say I love you, but she's handed you a plate of cut fruit, I would have, $1, but that's still like a lot of pennies,
Yeah, and fruit is seasonal, right? So in different seasons, you'll see your mom show her love in a different way.
Right. It's not always oranges.
So let me take you to a dessert that beautifully tells a story of cultural exchange, the Portuguese tart, also widely known as the Macau-style egg tart or po tart. While it may look similar to the classic Hong Kong egg tart, the Portuguese tart has a story and a flavor all its own. So can you tell which one is po tart? This one? Oops. Oh. Or this one? This one? This one, number 1? Or number 2? Are you sure? Okay. The answer is this one. So yeah, the second one is a po tart, and this one has some sugar on top. So this dessert actually traces back to Portugal, where it's called pastel de nata. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correctly, but I'm trying to get as close as possible. It was created by Catholic monks in the 18th century at the Jeronimos Monastery in Lisbon. They used leftover egg yolks after using egg whites to starch clothing, to make a rich custard filling encased in a crispy, flaky pastry shell. So how did this European pastry become a Chinese dessert? The answer is through Macau, which is a former Portuguese colony that became a vibrant point of cultural exchange. And in fact, from Portugal's perspective, Macau is a Portuguese overseas province. They don't call it a colony. In the 1980s, a British pharmacist turned baker named Andrew Stowe popularized a local version of the tart in Macau by combining traditional Portuguese methods with local Chinese tastes, and also made it less sweet. His recipe included a caramelized top, slightly scorched, almost brulee-like, and a softer, creamier filling. It was a hit. This became known as the Macau-style egg tart, and it quickly spread across Macau, Hong Kong, and beyond. When the immigration from Hong Kong and Macau surged to Canada in the 1980s and 1990s, the tart also traveled with them, straight into the display cases of Toronto Chinatown's bakeries and dim sum carts. Today, you can find them in Chinese bakeries on Spadina, in Scarborough, in Mississauga, Markham, Richmond Hill, many places. I still remember every time walking into a Chinese bakery and that sweet, eggy aroma of freshly baked tarts pulling me in like a magnet. Just a bite, warm, flaky, and slightly burnt on top, it was pure magic. So here's where things get interesting. Not all egg tarts are created equal. Let's take a little moment to distinguish the two. On the left is the Hong Kong style, and on the right is the Macau style. The Hong Kong style have a smooth pale yellow filling, typically made with evaporated milk. They rest in a short crust or cookie-like shell, offering a flavor that is light, soft, and mildly sweet. They are delicate, humble, almost comforting. On the right-hand side is the Macau-style egg tart, or po tart. It has a caramelized golden brown top. The filling is richer, creamier, often made with real cream or egg yolks. The crust is a flaky puff pastry shell, which gives a buttery crunch when you bite into it. So when you line them up, we can easily see the difference. So you might say the Hong Kong style is elegance, and the Macau style is indulgence. Today, you can find Portuguese tart not just in Chinese bakeries, but in many major grocery stores, airport cafes, some new style dessert shops. Sometimes it's even topped with matcha or filled with taro. And actually nowadays in Hong Kong, McDonald's also served po tart.
And the KFC does a better version of it.
But despite all the variations, which makes the po tart special is its journey. It's a dessert that crosses continents and culture. It reflects who we are, rooted in tradition, open to influence, and always evolving. So the next time when you bite into one, think of it not just as a treat, but as a rich story of migration, innovation, and cultural exchange. So now we visit a cool tropical dessert that has become a star of new style dessert cafe, Mango Sago. Combining mango, sago pearls, and coconut milk, this Hong Kong style dessert has been reimagined many times in Toronto, often with multicultural twists, and is loved by both Chinese and non-Chinese customers alike. To share how Mango Sago reflects creativity and cross-cultural taste, I'd like to invite Chiyi.
So as you can tell, we've organized ourselves chronologically from old to more recent to much more recent desserts. Not in terms of the age across the stage. Let's not misconstrue ourselves. But to segue from the potats over to mango sago, my father, when he was stuck in Canada with me during COVID, said it was the best potart he's ever had, that he's had in Toronto, from a Portuguese bakery, because we live in the liminal space between Little Portugal and Chinatown in downtown Toronto. And he walked into a Portuguese bakery, bought a potat, and said, I have never had one as good as one in Macau, and I had to come all the way to Canada to meet an entirely different path of immigration for that story to be possible, which to me was a very Toronto encounter. Mango sago is similarly very diasporic. We really wanted to show a range of not just the most typical desserts, but mango sago was selected amongst our group because I think it really shows how innovation twists and changes certain concepts into other formats. So hands up if you've had mango sago. Okay, excellent. Others, I assume, have seen a dish that looks like this in your vicinity before. So the idea of tapioca or things floating in a liquid that could be very viscous or very thin, very herbal and full of medicinal properties, or just like pure sugar water, on this whole spectrum is all in this one giant category, tong sui, or tian sui, depending on which part of the diaspora or Asia you're part of. And you have different configurations and dosages of not just the sugar water in combination, but also coconut milk, also other liquids to balance out that flavor. So when you try to understand how mango sago specifically comes about, you first have to reference the history of this being an entire category of understanding how TCM and traditional Chinese medicine concepts evolve into the dessert category. So as we move further and further away from the more virtuous herbal and medicinal properties into Sugarland, the reason apparently that mango sai mai lo, mango xi lu, or as actually it's known, if you were to look at a menu in Asia, no one would call it mango sago. They would probably call it yang gan lu, which is, I don't even know how to translate that as a Buddhist concept into English. It is so far away from describing the literal contents and ingredients of the dish that I found the name quite intriguing. Why is something so, like, from scripture being taken as the name for a dish that was invented, to my knowledge, in the 90s? Like, who was that devout? And it turns out it was a restaurateur that was expanding into Singapore. So they're one of the most well-known zaolaos in Hong Kong at the time, very successful, was expanding into a new branch, into across Southeast Asia, and recognized that a lot of these tongsois, sugar waters, are meant to be served hot. So this becomes an innovation in temperature. As you go further to the equator, and you're trying to cater to a larger and more diverse diaspora that speaks many different languages, you're dealing with the hot temperatures. And to innovate, they made mango sago a cold dish, and apparently the pomelo ingredient into this dish came from the idea that there was going to be a lot of discarded pomelo meat from running a restaurant in Singapore. In Singapore, very specifically in Singapore and Malaysia, they have this tradition during Chinese New Year of halo. Has anyone heard of this? Hey, anyone from Southeast Asia here? Yes, one, two. So most people around the world have not seen this for Lunar New Year celebrations, where you would gather with a whole bunch of your friends after drinking a whack ton of beers and gambling some money for good luck. You would probably gather a dish with 7 different colors and all go in with your chopsticks and just stir it up, just absolutely stir it up as a pun on the idea of generating more energy and fortune and good luck for the new year. And pomelo is one of the many things that's involved in this. And so this idea that they would have to have that as a menu item also meant there would be byproducts of it. And so then the mango sago was invented in combination with other things that would probably be cooling and pleasant to have during the summer months in a very, very hot area. And so yangzi actually is a reference to something that Guan Yin herself, this this figure floating around serenely on the lotus. I've picked this particular depiction because it was my favorite rendition of the Monkey King story from my childhood watching TVB. So this was a live reenactment of the journey to the West, where they go and retrieve the Buddhist scripts. And this is the Monkey King in the corner being horrified by some new object. But she's actually holding, it's such a pixelated photo now that I see it blown up, I'm so sorry. But she's actually holding a very delicate little vase there with a little branch of, does anyone know what a yangzi is? Trivia? Yangzi is actually a variety of willow. So the whole thing is imbued with many, many layers of meaning. But that is to say the dew water on the willow branch is what you would describe as yangzi ganlu, which you would offer to people to revive their spirits. And again, is there a connection to sago specifically? No, but that's what the guy decided to name his menu item, okay, guys? But from this, we invent this idea of dessert shops coming to North America with the latest 80s and 90s and early 2000s waves of immigrants, especially an increasing influx of international students who were very familiar with the new trend and a concept in Asia, found everywhere in Taipei, in Singapore, wherever you are, of the idea of a dessert shop that does not serve alcohol that you go to after you've had dinner with your family, which is like a kind of non-cafe, non-bar third space that North America has yet to see. Besides other subcultures, for example, let's say like you think of a shisha lounge or you think of like, tea lounges where there would be culturally specific expressions. And so I think as we see the mango sago be introduced to Toronto's menu and zeitgeist, you also see young people start to make this particular business model viable, that you would have an entire retail shop dedicated to the provision of dessert shops. So because I'm the urban planning nerd on the panel, that's my entry point, was tracking retail license applications into Toronto.
Right. So you mentioned in Southeast Asia during New Year, people would do that gesture and said hello.
Halo.
Hello.
Halo.
In Hong Kong, it's called lo hei.
Oh, lo hei. Lo hei. Sorry.
You
You have it right. I have it wrong.
You spend effort
Yes.
and you get the returns. That's how.
Yes, that's
how it
exactly
works.
right. Lo hei. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Forget what I said. That's the correct order of the words.
Might be different, right? Sometimes people just
Flip them
speak it.
around.
Yeah, flip them
Yeah.
around. Yeah. So now we visit a cool tropical. Last but not least, we turn to a dessert that's also a drink, and a whole cultural movement. Press one more time. Do you know what's this person drinking? Does it sound like drinking or the noise from a submarine?
Has anyone guessed it yet? No guesses so far. Bubble tea. That's the winning guess.
Yeah,
Ding, ding, ding.
bubble
You are
tea.
correct.
Yeah, so or boba is called in Taiwan. It's called boba milk tea. So it arrived in Toronto in early 2000 and quickly became a phenomenon. More than just tapioca pearls or milk tea, bubble tea represents a new generation of Chinese, Canadian, and Asian youth asserting their identity, culture, and taste. To share more about how bubble tea became that icon it is today, I'll pass it back to Chiyi.
Happy to keep going on this wave. So then you go from the idea of objects that are kind of chewy floating in sugar water, and then you innovate by just putting it in a cup. You put it in a cup, and then you can call it a tea, and then now you can walk around with it instead of sitting down to have it. But really, the contents of bubble teas seem as diverse as tong sui at this point. Now, as much as we think the mythology, we don't know who has invented bubble tea. So many people in Taiwanese night market scenes have claimed to be the inventor of bubble tea at this point that is probably pointless to try and figure it out. But when you think about the specific combination of milk tea, that's a whole can of worms to just argue and litigate the history of tea and how like low-grade teas came back around through like chai circuits, and then the additive of adding dairy on top, of course, being a very, very British insertion into a lot of Asia's like tea consumption patterns. Adding the pearls is the term used in Hong Kong, but actually not elsewhere. What we call the zanjus, which are the black tapioca pearls, is entirely a logical, normal next step to take. Like, this is not like a step of innovation that is so far removed from what pre-existed before. The real change is, first of all, someone invented a much wider straw for that to be possible. And then, yeah, just being able to hold it in your hands and walk around. And so then you can see that logic being revealed by the fact that there is such a thing as walking into a bubble tea store to order mango sago in a cup form. So our distinction of what is tongsoy and what is bubble tea, I think, needs to be blurred in terms of thinking about its origins and lineages and histories. And now you can, of course, get floating bits of fruit. You can actually have much more pure tea without the dairy component for those of our lactose-sensitive friends, which I assume there are many in the audience. And they come in all sorts of colors and sizes and sweetness levels. You're familiar. What is interesting is tracking its entry point into Canada specifically. So if you look at the Google search history of who even knows to Google the term bubble tea or a combination of the words boba near me on Google Maps, you see this really spiking and revealing where the Asian youth are in Canada. The top suburbs, Richmond at the highest peak interest indicated by 100, not that there were 100 youth counts. And then from there in descending order, Port Coquitlam, surprising us, suburb youth. And then Markham. Finally, the GTA makes it onto the map assertively, but the rest are by far and large near the Vancouver greater area. Interest over time, also very revealing. So the history of Google only exists as far as the search engine has existed. So that's 2004, living over there in the end of the spectrum. On the end closest to me is live real-time 2025. So you can really see that the late 2010s, like 2015, is where you really see this much larger spike, really peaking immediately post-lockdown, where we saw lineups on Yonge Street for new franchises and new brands that had just come in hot from Singapore and Taiwan, that we're seeing people lining up. Just insane to me to line up for bubble tea, but people are really boba fans, and so they did it. Now, some people have tried to map what is the change in downtown Chinatown specifically, vis-a-vis thinking about the pattern of people opening and running bubble tea shops. So if you look at just overall, before we get into bubble tea shops, how change has happened over time, just in 10 years, from 2009 to 2019, of the composition of what shops are operating in Chinatown. The notable things for me are the big drop in retail and wholesalers. So to me, this reflects a lot of the truth that we know about, Chinatown has lost a lot of its raw food sellers, a lot of the grocers, a lot of people selling fruit and vegetables to working class communities, and increasingly those shops being turned into bars or vacant storefronts, unfortunately. And on the other side, one of the only spikes that are not restaurants and bars, which we see overall as a pattern of gentrification, are cafes and bakeries. And inside that count is bubble tea shops. So someone tried in their master's thesis, again, I'm so sorry, this is so pixelated. I didn't expect the screen to be this big. Someone tried to map in their master's thesis for urban planning where youth are defined by people 20 to 24 years old specifically, very specific age range, living over the GTA. So if it's more pink, there's more young people in that specific dissemination area, okay? Each of the orange, like gray-orange blobs is a bubble tea shop. Now, you want to make a correlation between where young people are and where bubble tea shops are popping up. It was not that strong of a correlation. The paper actually was seeking to see if they could establish a correlation between international students of Asian countries specifically. Not a strong enough correlation. So this is telling us that the people who are consuming bubble tea writ large are not just the Asian youths. It's everybody across all cultures in the GTA. It's gotten that mainstream and popular. So that's what we know about bubble teas from the urban planning perspective. Probably not the dessert history you were expecting, but I'm happy to provide it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Koby and Chiyi, for sharing your insights and stories.